Hello, everybody, and welcome back for another episode of The Lions Grid. Joined today, of course, by my co-host Joseph Wilmot. I'm Kevin Marheine, and hopefully today it seems like, and I don't want to jinx us, but we'll address the elephant in the room. The technology issues seem to have subsided. Of course, yesterday was just a weird day, Joe. Not only did we have the technology problems, but it was storming, and it was just a number of factors there. But so far today, so good. The purpose of today's episode, we're going to take a look at some of the latest NFL injury and roster updates, and then also hit you with our predictions for, since today is Thursday, that means it's Thursday Night Football. So we'll hit you with our first picks for our Week 2 NFL Pick'em. So why don't we kick it off by taking a look at some of the roster moves that have happened. And Joe, I'm not sure if you've kept up with it, but luckily, or I guess fortunately for us, or unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of interesting things that have happened roster-wise. We've talked about it this week. One of the more interesting moves, of course, the Patriots signing Antonio Brown, but really that sort of happened last week. No real big signings or waivers here this week. I think one thing of note for Lions fans is, even though he hasn't practiced yet, I don't believe, Gerard Davis has been activated by the Lions. So I don't know if we'll see him here in Week 2 against the Chargers, but it does look like he's progressing towards getting back on the field here sooner rather than later. So some good news there in terms of the Lions. Moving on to the injury side of thing, and Joe, this is where I think things get more interesting. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but the Jets have a little bit of a dumpster fire going on at the moment. Sam Darnold is going to miss this Monday Night Football game. He is dealing with mono. Le'Veon Bell was getting an MRI done today on his shoulder. C.J. Mosley out with a groin injury. And then their defensive tackle, I know it's Quentin Williams, I want to say, or Quincy Williams, mispractice with a knee. Or no, I think it was Quintel Williams. So the Jets, a team like the Lions, where people thought they were vastly improved, they lost a shocker to the Bills, and now this. What do you think this means for the Jets moving forward, Joe?
Well, all those names that you mentioned that are on the Jets and are not going to play Monday night, they're really the only reason to watch the Jets.
Yes.
So like for them all to be adding question marks around their play time on Monday, kind of puts a damper on Monday Night Football and kind of disappoints you because you expect the Jets to be one of the more competitive teams in that division, and you just gotta hope things don't go or are as bad as they actually sound.
Yeah, and the Monday night game, in theory, was supposed to be a pretty good game. You had the Jets, who would be playing the Browns, two teams who made some improvements to their rosters this offseason, two teams that have been struggling of late, but seem to be moving in the right direction, and both of them came out and disappointed fans in Week 1. I think the Jets letting the Bills come back on them, and then, of course, the Browns getting absolutely demolished by the Titans. So, you got to think for the Browns, a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel there for them. They like I said, got obliterated by the Titans, which sort of came out of nowhere. But at least now in this Monday night matchup, they're looking at a Jets team that could be severely diminished in terms of the product they're going to have on the field. So we'll have to see. There's a good chance for them to rebound, but we'll have to see. Of course, there were quite a few injuries looking around the league. Some of the big ones, you had Tyreek Hill, who got knocked out of the Chiefs game last week with the injury to his sternum. And so far, I haven't seen a whole lot of updates there yet. I know the fear is that he might be done for the season, but I haven't seen anything definitive yet on his status there. Of course, Patrick Mahomes also got shaken up during that game as well. But was definitely able to get out there and finish it. The Chiefs, Joe, we both like them. They're both teams we've picked to win the AFC West. But certainly, I think they'll be okay, but definitely got spooked there by the injury bug here in week one.
Yeah, the question mark is whether or not they're going to be able to overcome the Tyreek Hill injury.
Mm-hmm.
Who's a playmaker, who's a superstar, who's got speed and playmaking ability. Patrick Mahomes, I don't think he's going to have, or miss time, but I think, you just got to, hope that he has, a season like last year with the players that are around him, and that the defense can play more consistently. That's one thing that kind of concerned me was, how many points they gave up to Jacksonville, and, whether or not they're as elite as we think they are. Their defense, it was known last year for giving up a lot of points. So I didn't see that improve in week one. And for them to be missing Tyreek Hill, it's like, are they going to be able to constantly outscore the amount of points that their defense gives up?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see because obviously he's a big part of their offense. Him not being there, you did see some different pieces step up in his absence. You had Sammy Watkins who had a big game, LaShawn McCoy making a little bit of a reemergence there, back paired up with Andy Reid. So there's certainly still weapons there, and of course Travis Kelce. Quite frankly, since Gronk retired, possibly the best tight end in the league. There's still plenty of weapons, but he's definitely a big part of their identity on offense, so it will be interesting to see how they do. And I think they'll definitely need to do a better job of protecting Patrick Mahomes, because if he gets hurt, things for them really go downhill at that point. Of course, that's really true for any team. Your star quarterback goes down. Very few teams have a backup capable of coming in there and performing at the same level.
Yeah, they're being tested early on with some of this adversity. So, good teams can overcome it and can, make a push for the playoffs and championships and whatnot. But definitely being tested early on here in 2019.
Most certainly. Then moving over, taking a look at Washington, very interesting situation going on there. Coach Jay Gruden, not John Gruden, but his younger brother, had Adrian Peterson a healthy scratch for week one. Had some public statements about that, saying that if they were going to be handing off the ball, 40 sometimes, he'd dust off Adrian Peterson. Last week, Darius Geis, who's already coming off an injury that took him out for all of his rookie season, has a issue with his meniscus in his knee that looks like it's going to prevent him from playing. So now Jay Gruden's going to have to eat a little bit of crow and rely on Adrian Peterson to be that sort of the first and second down workhorse for this Washington team moving forward. Obviously age with running backs is something that people, typically you don't see very many elder statesmen as active running backs. So Adrian Peterson is a little bit of an anomaly from that standpoint, Joe. But last season he still showed that he could get things done. So are you excited to see what Adrian Peterson can do now that he's going to be relied upon so heavily by Washington moving forward?
Yeah, he's a motivated man. During the offseason or over the summer, I heard a news report on 97.1 The Ticket that said Adrian Peterson, who's made over $100 million in his career, is broke. He owes child support, he owes taxes, he owes this and that, and he doesn't have any money. So I'm sure, being a healthy scratch doesn't provide as much of a paycheck as playing in the game is going to. So I think he's going to be motivated.
Yeah, I think all that topped with his head coach kind of talking down about him a little bit, I think it could spell bad news for the Cowboys, who they will be playing later on this week. Of course, the Cowboys defense has looked much improved, so I think they'll probably still do all right. But potentially, it could be there's going to be plenty of motivation there for AP. So we'll have to see what sort of performance he can turn out in that first game being called upon by the team. Really, just looking around the league, there's a lot. Of course, teams are required if somebody misses practice to report them on the injury list and give some sort of indication as to why they're listed there. One of the things that I've found pretty interesting, just taking a look at the injury reports from across the league is there's quite a few guys that have been missing practice with illness. So obviously we just kicked off the NFL season. These guys have been working really hard. Um, Kind of interesting to see that crop up. Obviously, you have Sam Darnold with the Jets. He's got mono, which is an illness, and he'll be missing potentially multiple weeks due to that illness. But you have people like James Conner, who's currently listed as questionable with an illness. The Steelers running back. You have who else did I see that was important to note? Ted Ginn, the wide receiver for the Saints, also struggling with an illness. There's like at least 5 or 7 or 8 more. Chris Moore with the Ravens. It seems like right now with the season kicking off, that a lot of these players are struggling, and it makes sense because they've been working very hard to prepare for the season. So as you're doing that, and if your team had to travel, you're getting into the airport and things like that, areas where you're going to get exposed to other people and germs and whatnot. So it seems like here that potentially week 2 could be impacted kind of significantly just by people getting sick. So usually when we think of the NFL injury report, Joe, we think of like the big injuries, like someone tore an ACL, or they broke a couple ribs, or maybe they have a sprained ankle or something like that. It's kind of interesting, I think, to see that there are so many players that are missing time currently from practice because of illness.
Yeah, I think another thing we have to think about the reason behind that is that not only are you traveling, but when you arrive at a stadium, there's, all different sorts of people coming from all different places around the world. 50,000 fans, on average, or give or take 10,000 or whatever. But that's a lot of people, and that's a lot of, chemicals in the air for people to be breathing, and sweating and the heat, and just taking care of your health these days is a very important thing that some people overlook the importance of it. And not only do you have to be physically fit, you have to be healthy with your decisions to to stay off the injury list.
Yeah, it's a one big petri dish, those stadiums. So you're bringing in germs from all over the place, and I think you're right. It's one of those things I think maybe that people take for granted or even overlook in terms of like the NFL players, regiment to help try and prevent stuff like that from happening. Because obviously, if you or I get a cold, we can sort of struggle through it in our day, no problem. But if you have to be running, 4.3 speeds and you're dealing with a cold, it's much harder to do given the physical demands they have.
Yeah, then you get hit and you get a snot bubble getting out of you or something. And you're like, God, jeez. Here I am running and thinking I'm doing well, monitoring my sickness, and then whoosh, you get smacked, and out comes all your sinuses and stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to see. And then real quickly, we'll take a look at some of these, talk real quick about some of these other injuries. The 49ers are a team that has some pretty key injuries. Nick Bosa, the rookie they drafted out of Ohio State, still has yet to make his NFL debut here in the regular season, and he didn't play in the preseason at all with an ankle injury as well. Tevin Coleman, the running back, also injured his ankle in the previous week, and both of them are questionable to play here in week 2 against the Bengals. So the 49ers sort of struggling there, both on the defensive and offensive side of the balls with some injuries, and their opponents, the Cincinnati Bengals, of course, AJ Green remains sidelined. He has that ankle injury, but he was able to get out of his walking boot. So while it'll still be a few weeks before you're seeing him actually in the game, like on game day, good to see that he is making progress there out of the walking boot, and hopefully soon he can start working on rehab and slowly get his way back onto the practice field. And then once he's on the practice field, it should only be a matter of time before we see him back in game action. Of course, you also had Joe Mixon, who injured his ankle, and their starting left tackle, Corey Glenn, who's coming off a concussion, both sitting out of practice as well this week. So both teams, the 49ers and Bengals, banged up. But yeah, some of their potential star players going to be missing from this week 2 matchup here. And then taking a look just at some of this other stuff, a lot of it's just players being limited in practice. David, I can't pronounce his name, Bakitari, the Packers offensive tackle that was able to keep Khalil Mack in check last week. He's dealing with some back issues. Jimmy Graham's dealing with a finger injury, but all those guys still likely to play. But it's definitely interesting to see that. If you're a Lions fan, it's good to see that it's not just the Lions who are dealing with some players being banged up. And speaking of the Lions players who we're keeping an eye on, we already mentioned Gerard Davis. He's been activated. He hasn't been a full participant in practice. He was limited on Wednesday. So was offensive tackle Taylor Decker, defensive lineman Deshaun Hand, and also cornerback Rashawn Melvin. For Rashawn Melvin, it's his knee. Deshaun Hand's dealing with that elbow injury, and Taylor Decker's having some back trouble there. So the fact they were at practice bodes well for them potentially being able to go in Sunday's game against the Chargers, Joe. But I don't think it's not a done deal for any of those guys. We'll have to keep seeing. I haven't seen what the report was out of today's practice, but it'll be interesting to see if they are available here for week 2 for the Lions.
Yeah, I think we have to feel pretty fortunate that we only have 4 players of our starting and our players on the team that are going to play on Sunday. That only 4 of them are really suffering with some injuries, and even those are not permanent on whether or not they're going to miss significant time or even a week.
Yep, and speaking of significant injuries, our opponents, the Los Angeles Chargers, they definitely going to be out for the upcoming games. For our game is going to be Trevor Williams. He's a cornerback. He's headed to injured reserve. Tight end Hunter Henry has been diagnosed with a pretty significant knee injury that's going to likely keep him out for multiple weeks, if not land him on IR. And unfortunately for me, he's on my fantasy football team, and he's now joined the ranks of originally there was only one player who I refuse to draft or interact with when it comes to fantasy football, and it's Andy Dalton, because I've taken him so many times in the past, and he has let me down every time. Hunter Henry has now joined that crew, so now there are 2. I will not ever draft or sign Hunter Henry and Andy Dalton. Those are my 2 guys I'm going to stay away from now on, because they're players that have always had a lot of upside. Everyone's always pretty high on Hunter Henry to step in and be like the new Antonio Gates, but it never turns into that production. So good news for the Lions in that they will be missing that the weapon from the offense. But yeah, for us fantasy owners, a little rough news there. So that's really all the big injury notes that we have so far at our disposal. Tomorrow's episode, we're going to be doing a fantasy football focus, and during that, if we have any updated news, definitely we'll be sure to let you know, because obviously, depending on what happens with Le'Veon Bell's MRI, that could be a big fantasy impact. But at the moment, since it is only Thursday, we do still have a couple of days here, and since the notes from Thursday's practice haven't been made available, certainly still some time for some of these players who are dealing with injuries to get themselves available for Sunday's game. So most of these games we're going to have to wait till Sunday. But Joe, it is Thursday night, which means it's time for another Thursday night football. I'm going to toss our picks. I'm going to toss our picks up here on the screen. The game is between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Carolina Panthers. So let's see. And both me and Joe going with Carolina in this game. Joe, the Panthers had a pretty good week 1 matchup with the LA Rams, whereas the Tampa Bay Buccaneers took on the 49ers in week 1. Um, really taking a look at their two performances, the Panthers lost a close one there to the Rams at home. They lost 30-27. Um, the Buccaneers, they lost that game to the 49ers 31-17. I did watch part of the Tampa Bay game, and for a while there, Tampa was hanging around and looked like they were going to make that a game with the 49ers. But then Jameis Winston started to turn into his usual turnover machine self, which is the main motivation for why I'm going with the Panthers in this game. He just is playing too careless with the ball. I don't think that's going to change in 1 week's time. So I think Carolina's going to be able to capitalize on the fact that he is a turnover machine at the moment. It's also at home for Carolina, so lucky them. They get to start at home for 2 games in a row. But yeah, there wasn't really anything I saw out of Tampa Bay in week 1 to make me think they could go into Carolina and pick up this win.
Yeah, they're promoting Ndamukong Suh for Tampa Bay as like their superstar player that people want to watch on Tampa Bay tonight. And after seeing Jameis Winston play poorly in week 1, it gives me no reason to think he's going to turn around and have a good game against these Panthers. And we didn't really see too much of Cam Newton having a stellar game passing the ball or getting rushing yards. But what we did see was all-star performance or a Pro Bowl type performance from Christian McCaffrey, who I have on my fantasy team. So I'm looking for him to have another big night, and it being Thursday Night Football and the Panthers playing such a close game against last year's Super Bowl team, the Rams. I think that Carolina is going to bounce back, get the victory, and play good football tonight. Maybe more than just a close game. Might be a 10-14 point win for Carolina.
Yeah, could be a pretty. It could be a close game depending on how better Jameis Winston is at limiting his turnovers. If just looking at the matchup in general, so obviously with Thursday Night Football, it does switch back and forth between what network is hosting it. Last week was sort of a good matchup to kick off the season with. You had the Green Bay Packers and the Bears, one of the biggest rivalries in all of the NFL. That game wasn't hosted on the NFL Network. I think it was simulcast on there, but it wasn't hosted solely there. So a pretty good matchup. This week, it is a NFL Network broadcast. So the Panthers are definitely, as you mentioned, I think an exciting team. They have a lot going on between Christian McCaffrey. There's plenty of interesting things about the Panthers that make them a hot ticket. Cam Newton, there's plenty going on there. Tampa Bay, I mean, you said it yourself. The person they're promoting is Ndamukong Suh as their star player. So, not that Suh's bad by any means. He's just, he's not a A-lister anymore. So these NFL Network games, and next week it's also on the NFL Network, and it's the Titans and the Jags. And the Titans did come out and surprise some people in week 1, but obviously Jacksonville, it's the NFL Network games seem to be a little lackluster in terms of their matchups and their potential entertainment value. And it isn't really until it shifts to some of the other networks, like in week 4, it's going to be Thursday Night Football on Fox, and it's going to be the Philadelphia Eagles at Green Bay. That is a very nice, very entertaining matchup between two teams. So it's kind of interesting that they seem to be cherry picking the matchup so that the ones that will be seen by more people are the more exciting ones, and the ones that are kind of be more of the snoozers are just being reserved for the NFL Network itself.
Yeah, I'm kind of excited to see tonight's game, though, because it's going to answer some questions for these Carolina Panthers on whether or not they have a good defense. I don't really know their team too well. I just know that last year they were poised to have a playoff run and get into the playoffs. And the year before, they can't remember if that was a down year or if it was the year before that they went 15-1. But they've been a couple seasons removed from that 15-1 and Super Bowl appearance, and I just kind of want to see if they're going to be on the same path as they were last year, and if they can stay healthy enough to get the sixth or fifth playoff spot.
Yeah, I think a big thing for them is going to be obviously, I mentioned it earlier with the Chiefs, and it's not a unique thing to them, but keeping Cam Newton healthy, because if they have to go to their backup QB, or even if he's playing and he's playing at 70%, I don't know if that's good enough. Especially looking around the talent in the NFC. Obviously, in the NFC South, you also have the Saints, who are going to be right there, Drew Brees and company, fighting for that NFC South title. But then just looking around, if you're trying to get into the wild card, the NFC North is chock full of talent. You have the NFC East with the Cowboys and the Eagles. And then over on the West, you got the Rams, the Seahawks, a dark horse chance the 49ers try and do something funny. So there's plenty of competition. So if they want to be successful, I think Cam Newton's going to need to stay healthy to do so.
Yeah, after watching the Atlanta Falcons, I really think they're gonna have a bad season this year. And tonight against Tampa Bay, this should be an easy win for Carolina, and it'll give me an idea of what to expect from them. At least more of an accurate idea of what kind of team they have for the rest of the season. That's why I like these games that showcase other teams that are on Thursday night or maybe Sunday night, or the 4:00 time slot on Sunday and Monday night, because it gives you a chance to view all these different teams in the NFL that you can't watch when you're watching your team on Sundays.
Yeah, it definitely gives you a chance to experience some teams you don't normally get to see, and that's sort of the nice thing about the state of the NFL in general now. Anyways, it's much easier to experience teams outside of your hometown market now than it used to be, even 5 or 6 years ago. It's great. I think definitely one of the things that has helped propel the NFL to where it is at the moment is just that it's become easier to consume the games that are outside of your target market, because it used to be if it wasn't on your local Fox station, you weren't going to see it. But now there's, even on Sundays, if the Lions have beaten you down to the point where you can no longer watch them, you don't have to give up on football. You can pretty much see any of the other games on, whether it be through NFL Red Zone or the NFL Sunday Ticket, or there's a ton of online services now between Hulu and all that'll broadcast the games as well. So it's sort of a great time to be an NFL fan. If you're unhappy with your team, you don't have to just settle for watching them. And certainly the nice thing about the Thursday night, Monday night, and Sunday night games is it gives you a chance to, even if your teams aren't playing, get to see some of the other talent that's out there across the NFL, which can be good because hopefully your team's going to do well, and hopefully the Lions will see some of these teams in the future that aren't already on their schedule if they have to meet in the playoffs. So it gives you a chance to do some scouting and see what you might be going up against there, or who you'll be competing with for some of, like I said, either the wild card spot potentially in when it comes to the Panthers, or again a team that you might match up with against in the playoffs should you make it there. So that's gonna do it for our episode today. Like I said, we will be coming back tomorrow doing a more fantasy-oriented video, just talking about some players that you might want to take a look at for fantasy football this week. And also just if there are any injury updates, keeping you up to date with those. So if Le'Veon Bell, if we find out something bad came back in that MRI, potentially we'll have some news about that. But If you enjoyed our show today, please do help the channel grow. Hit that like button. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us out greatly. We're still making pretty good progress towards our 100 subscriber goal so that we can get our custom URL. But any help you can provide is greatly appreciated. So if you haven't subscribed, it's one of the easiest ways to help us out is just to go ahead and hit that. And then if you want to be kept up to date when all of our latest videos are going live, you can also ring the bell once you've subscribed to get a nice alert either on your desktop or mobile when we're going live with a new video here on YouTube. But that will do it for us today. Again, thanks everybody for tuning in, and we will catch you tomorrow during the next video. See ya.